The Axis faction in Enlisted is regularly considered to be one of the most popular and one of the most attractive factions for Enlisted players. The King Tiger, the STG, the FG42, the Kar 98K, Stukas, that much cannot be challenged. Yet it is also the faction that continuously creates the most debate and most controversy, the most memes out of them all. But why should you care? Perhaps you're an Axis main, wondering why a few months ago your faction was winning every single game almost completely unchallenged. But nowadays it's a struggle to even see your team put up a fight against consistently competent Soviet and American teams. And now you're debating whether to leave the game entirely. Alternatively, you might be a Soviet or American main, basking in the glory of your 67th straight win against the Germans, but not realizing the consequences of your actions. This right here is the continuous tale of the ever-evolving Enlisted meta, what every player currently experiences. The reason why you're going through phases of always losing or always winning. And it's not because one faction just has better stuff than the other, contrary to popular belief. Now, I don't believe it will come as a shock to you if I said that, currently, as of January and February 2024, Axis is really hard to play right now. But by hard to play, I actually mean hard to win. Most of you will have seen in your own Germany games that, recently, you tend to lose a lot more than you might ever have remembered losing before. I've seen countless posts describing the pain that Axis mains are experiencing, the suffering endured by Italian players with subpar teammates, and how some of them are close to giving up entirely. Now, this won't be everyone. The best players of the game can still carry Axis games, but they do need to completely hard sweat it in order to have a small chance. The top clans of the game, both of which we covered in the last video how ahead of the game they are right now, often refuse to play Axis solo, or even in a 2-stack. 3 stacks or 4 are what is often required for them to even have a chance. This is the reality we currently live in, and I know for a fact that we've all felt it, at least to a small degree. But why are we feeling it? Conventional wisdom might simply suggest that Germany and Italy, the combined Axis, are simply bad factions to play. I've seen countless players accuse this to be the reason why Germany suffers, and some players have even used the fact that I said that Soviets are best for competitive gameplay in my previous video as justification for this. But perhaps there is indeed some evidence to this. For example, comparing the FG42-2 to the AVT-40, two basically equivalent weapons in terms of being the best possible tech-tree automatic rifles for their respected nations. The AVT is, using some of the most important gun statistics, a better gun. I bet many of you watching this video didn't even know this. You could even make the same argument about the STG-44 to the Fedorov Automat, the best assault rifles for each faction. I mean, look how much more damage the Fedorov does. And what about the presence of Soviet body armor, which by the way does actually have an in-game effect of minus 10% damage reduction. That is insane. The Axis doesn't have any of that ability, and honestly, they should. So, perhaps Germany actually does suffer. No. Don't be silly. You're ignoring German tanks, including the King Tiger, which is so much better at killing enemy tanks and infantry, as we found out by watching that clan war last video. What about the German anti-personnel mines, which actually bury themselves inside the ground, which makes them impossibly hard to see, and hence Axis mains can get easy free kills whilst Soviet AP mines are super easy to spot. And the best weapon in the entire game is an Axis weapon, the Battle Pass Gewehr 43 Kurz. And wait a second, we're ignoring the Americans and Japanese factions here, because if we use the same logic, the USA clearly struggles in comparison to Germany. It's not even close, with simply weaker tanks. Just look at the Jumbo versus the King Tiger. Weaker weapons, I mean FG42-2 versus M2 Carbine, the best automatic rifle weapon for the US, is absolutely no contest for the Fallschirmjägergewehr. And even if you look at every research tier and every battle rating between the two, Germany wins at almost every single stage. But nobody is currently saying that America suffers. In fact, the whole reason the devs are about to add the Pershing tank, as well as very recently buffing the sights and mechanics of so many American guns, is proof that the devs understand that Germany is no issue, and that the Western Allies faction needs aid for whenever they get very even battles. I don't even need to mention Japan to prove this point further. So, Germany is, factually, not a bad faction to play. Remember, Enlisted is not trying to force factions to be exactly perfectly balanced. They will try to get them similar, but never absolutely equal. People forget this. They'd have to unnaturally change so many weapons in order to be able to achieve perfect balance. Some factions instead are better in certain things, like the US with close air support, Germans with tanks, Soviets with infantry weapons, etc. That is how Enlisted develops factions. So, if Germany doesn't suffer due to its equipment, as we just proved, then why are the Axis always losing right now? Here's the answer. Simply put, it's the player base's fault. Now, before you all question me in the comments, let me explain. We're all humans, therefore we follow human nature, and human nature dictates that humans are naturally biased. There are many forms this takes. Let's take, for example, the well-known anchoring bias. This means that humans anchor, or always refer to, information we learned at the beginning of a certain period. But how does this apply to Enlisted? Well, you might get completely stomped for some sudden reason in your first, second, third, and so forth games of Axis in Enlisted you played in the last few months. What does that make you do? It makes your experiences in your future games you play come back to this horrid memory. In fact, this now leads on to what we call the confirmation bias, meaning that humans tend to, subconsciously, search for extra information that supports their prior beliefs, or your anchor in this case, as in that the Germany faction is hard to win with. So then you might be playing more games and continuously losing. Or alternatively, you might seek out other players' advice. Ask them why the Axis are difficult, to confirm what you already think. They might even state something along the lines of, yeah, Axis players aren't very good right now, it happens sometimes, lol XD. And as a result, we go into the final relevant bias here. Herding. Sheep copy sheep, and humans copy other humans. What works for a number of others should work for you too, right? So you stop playing Axis, and instead turn to grind the Soviets, Americans, Japanese, you name it. After all, that's what everybody is saying is easier, and from your own games, it seems to indeed be easy to win. Well, that's all just the theory. Most of that might not actually be strictly speaking true, but what is 100% true is the herding part. For whatever prior reason, whether what I just explained is the true reason or not, many players, including myself here, see Germany losing many games. As a result, you're scared. You avoid the Axis too. Point is, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Everyone, in turn, makes the problem even worse, into what seems like a never-ending downward spiral, causing initially anger, then outrage, and in the end, pure disbelief by the player base. And I've been there too. But what was that initial and sudden moment, that jump, where Axis became hard to win with, and hence causing the biases, herding, and the memes to get worse? That, my friends, is not always clear. However, we can make a few possible inferences. The first reason is because of Enlisted updates, where the developers might add something super attractive to one side and less attractive to the others, causing much of the player base to shift to or away from certain factions immediately. Take when they added the King Tiger to Germany, the AS-44 to the Soviets, or even just when they added the Japanese faction as a whole. Monumental shifts in the meta of the game and the player base rapidly followed suit. And you will have noticed this if you check back at the devlog dates when they were added. And I can already bet you that Americans will rule the game harder than they do now once the Pershing gets added very, very soon, and will rule it for at least some time. But it's not always due to updates, because if you remember correctly, when Enlisted's game-changing revolutionary campaign merge update happened at the end of 2023, Germany and Italy, the Axis, were always winning. It seemed to many players to be virtually impossible to win with the Soviets and Americans, and impossible to lose with the Germans. At this point, Japan also stomped every single game. But what was the reason for all this? There was no new tank, no new aircraft, or gun for the Germans to point to as the cause. Simply put, the Germans had a bigger player base at the time of the merge across all campaigns, due to being more popular, as we said at the start of this video. Hence, this effect was massively multiplied at the merge update, and because of how insane this influx of players was for the unified Axis faction, the herding kicked in, and many more joined their side for some more chill and easy gameplay wins. And to further support my point, there was again no obvious reason whatsoever why people suddenly moved away from the Axis in the last few months, and once others started noticing, more of them left. It just happens. It's the player base shifting their grind focus. The most logical start of this process, though, could have been due to some of the best players in 4 stacks start playing the harder sides for harder battles, and once others start losing to them and seeing how good this other side is, all of the biases we just mentioned come into play, causing the player base shift, and perhaps the newest players to this game realize this last. Hence, what appears to end up happening is basically matches of all veterans versus all new enemy players, also known as one-sided domination. It's this, sometimes random, sometimes intentional, player-based shift what has made the meme Germany suffers. But saying that wouldn't be doing it justice, because it doesn't just apply to the Axis. It happens to every faction in the entire game. Veterans of this game will remember the days when every single faction had a period of pure domination. The whole point of this video is to say that players will move to a faction, and at some point in the near future, they'll shift back. Axis will soon be the dominant faction again. It's inevitable if you look at the patterns of the player base over time. So this video is not designed to tell anybody to worry. It's not designed to tell you to leave the game until your faction is the meta side once again. And its message is equally not to tell you to shift your grind to this said meta side. All it is explaining why these things happen. Why it's not that one faction is underpowered, and why all of this will be reversed at some point soon. Or perhaps fixed altogether. Maybe we can help to ensure that every faction has a mixture of experienced veterans and new players to balance out gameplay. I mean, the best players play the hard side regularly to improve at the game and have more excitement. You guys can also group up together, perhaps finding teammates on my over 3,200 player Enlisted Discord server, or with me on streams, and we often play the hard side until we make it a balanced side. Besides, you'll learn so much more about the game when doing so. So, if we do our part, it's left to the developers to do theirs. The upcoming release on Steam should bring in a ton of new players that will help the balance of factions. By the way, you should add it to your wishlist, even if you're already playing it, because it helps to push the game so much. I'd recommend it. The recent improvements to American weapons are superb updates, and hopefully in future, they create updates with new items of equal attractiveness for each faction, to keep people grinding all factions at the same time. The Pershing may not actually be ideal in this regard. It's garnered the interest of the entire community, but once its hype passes after it's added, who knows what side will become the meta again. The so-called Axis problem won't exist, and we shan't see its like again. But what do you think about the Axis, or the imbalance of matches? Let your feedback be known to the developers in the comments, and I'll be seeing you guys in the next video.